The Organisation Administrator or Org Admin role is an important one. We'll start with an overview. In order to manage or administer user accounts, you'll need to be an Organisation Administrator. Here's what an Org Admin can do. First are the users. If you're an Org Admin, you can only manage people who are part of your organisation and not other organisations. In Aconex, a user is someone who has an account with a username and password and that can log in and access projects. Next are the details for the organisation itself, and this includes setting some defaults and basic information about your company. You probably won't be doing a lot of admin in this area, but it's still good to know. Lastly, there are preferences that relate to your organisation. There are a lot of them, but we'll focus on the ones that matter and that help you maintain more control and reduce risk. There will be some overlap in these three areas, but if you just remember that the Org Admin looks after users, details and preferences, that's a really good place to start. We discussed communication in the Organisation Administration course as well, but it's always worth reminding ourselves about the importance of communication in relation to administration. As an administrator, you'll be making changes to the way in which Aconex behaves and how users interact with it. These changes might be big or small, which is often very subjective. But never underestimate any kind of change. Even what appears to be a simple alteration to a setting in the preferences area could have a big impact. It's really important that you communicate early and often about any changes you make to the setup of your organisation, a project, and your colleagues' accounts. While it's nice to get a surprise every now and then, if it affects how others work, that might not be so welcome. Let's look at 3 factors that make communication successful. First, there's consistency. It really does pay to be consistent with your communications. This means using the same mechanism and format each time, and preferably those that give you the greatest chance of your communication being read or heard. If people know that important communications are always in the same place, it means less effort on their part. Next, make your communications concise. If something takes more than about 60 seconds to read, it's likely to remain unread. Sad but true. It's fair to say that most of us have to deal with lots of information coming at us from lots of different places. It's easy to miss things, and if we see something that we think will take up too much of our time, we're likely to ignore it. Finally, be clear, and that means keeping the language simple. Don't use fancy words, phrases or technical jargon if you can avoid it. For example, if your communications are in English but a lot of your audience don't speak English as their first language, using certain phrases and words can be confusing. Most of all, be direct and tell people what they need to know and what they need to do. If you need people to do something, make that the first thing in your communication. Remember the 3 C's: consistent, concise, and clear communications. We'll start with a question. It's a question that's often only asked after the event. Let's explain. Does your company or organisation have a process in place to deal with new people starting and people leaving? Basically, onboarding and offboarding. It's an important question. If your company is using a platform like Aconex, it's likely that it's just one of many systems or applications that require a user account. The larger your company, the more likely it is that there will be larger volumes of people coming and going. It's vitally important that access to any system is managed appropriately and efficiently, especially if that system stores or contains company data and information. A simple way to manage staff access to Aconex is to put Aconex onto the list of systems that your new starter and leaver processes normally have. That way, you know when to create a new account for someone when they start and, as importantly, know when to remove their access should they leave. If there is no process, Have a think about how you can easily be kept in the loop about new staff starting and staff that are leaving. The last thing you need is for someone to continue to have access to Aconex or any other system after they've left the company. In this video, we'll look at how new user accounts are created, how we can lock and disable accounts, and how to manage some details on the accounts. Creating a new user account is very simple, but we should always check that an account does not exist first. It's common for people to forget that they once had an account, and we want to avoid creating duplicate accounts. To check, open the global directory and search on your company name. Keep in mind that there may be multiple entries for your company, different countries, regions, departments, and so on. Let's assume a new user account is required. We go to Setup and then Create User. Enter their name, email address, and decide on a username for them. The system will tell you if a username is already taken. You can also add them to any projects they need access to. Click Invite when you're done, and that's it. They'll get an email with a login link as well as a link to a video to get them started. Now let's look at locking and disabling user accounts. First, we'll open up a list of accounts via Setup and User Accounts list. Click on a name to edit the details. Once a user account has been created, it can never be deleted. And this is to ensure that data integrity is maintained. So, what should we do if someone leaves a company? At the bottom of the user information page, there are two checkboxes: account locked and account disabled. The locked option is something that I will explain later, but for now it's important to understand that this will be checked if a user has tried to log in unsuccessfully 5 times, either using the wrong username or password. If this box is checked, you can simply uncheck it to unlock the account. If we're dealing with someone that has left the company, we would check both boxes and click Save, and that's it. Obviously, if they return to the company, you can enable and unlock the account. Notice that the username or login name is shown on the page. Often that's the thing the person's forgotten when they're trying to log in after not using Aconex for some time. It's worth noting that whilst you're able to change the majority of the details on this page, you can't change the user's given or family name. If someone's name does change, for example through marriage, they need to contact our service desk team to get that changed. This is part of our compliance requirements. Finally, let's look at some settings. First, there's the Administration tab at the top of the screen. This is where you can change the password strength, and you can choose some standard and complex. Then there's the access rule for the user. This determines how often someone is required to change their password. These can also be changed at the organisation level, and we cover that in more detail in another video. The default settings are suitable for most organisations and scenarios, but you or your company may want to change them to better match specific policies or procedures. Then there's the password button. This allows you to create a new password for that user. Note you'll have to enter your own password in the first box to confirm your own login before changing the user's password. Whilst this is a useful feature, you probably don't want to get stuck doing this on a regular basis. It's much better to get a user to use the link on the login page instead. Here's a quick recap. A locked account is typically because a user has entered their login details incorrectly 5 times. But a locked account can still receive mail and notifications and can be seen by others in the project and global directories. And that user can also request a password reset via the login page, which will then unlock their account. A disabled account prevents the user from resetting their login details and hides their details in the system. However, their details will still appear on historic records within a project. That's why it's important you lock and disable an account if that person's left your company. That way they cannot access potentially sensitive company or project related information. User roles define what someone can do or not do if they're assigned to that role. Let's take a closer look. In Aconex, there are 5 standard roles that are created by default for every organisation. They can be changed and new roles can be added, but the 5 standard roles are designed to suit most organisations in most situations. The basic role, as the name suggests, provides entry-level access to the system and is useful for people that only need to search for information and send the occasional piece of mail. Next is the Basic Plus role. This is the default role assigned to all new user accounts. It has all the abilities of the basic role, but additionally allows people to supersede and transmit documents. It's the default because it provides access to features and functionality used by the majority of users. Then we have the Document Admin role. This would typically be assigned to document controllers or users who might be responsible for document control type activity. It allows them to make documents confidential and to upload large volumes of documents using our bulk processing feature. Next is Project Admin. Essentially, this allows a user to change the configuration of a project, and we cover that role in more detail in the Project Admin course. Finally, there is the Org Admin role. This role's settings cannot be changed, and the first person to register an organisation becomes the first Org Admin. This role provides complete control over an organisation, its users, and any projects that the person is a part of. It's a powerful role and comes with a good deal of responsibility. We recommend that each organisation has a minimum of 2 Org Admins, just in case one is away. With the exception of the Org Admin role, all the roles can be renamed, removed, and have their settings changed. We recommend that you don't change too much if you're new to Aconex administration, and we've found that the vast majority of organisations never change the standard role settings. You can find out more about roles on Support Central. To understand how we manage roles in Aconex, we should first discuss permissions. Permissions control what a user can or cannot do within Aconex as a whole or within a specific project. Most permissions are essentially functions and features. Depending on which permissions are switched on or off will determine what that role can or cannot use. Here are some of the permissions that you'll see. In another video, we'll cover how we assign these to roles, but for now let's explain the basics. You can think of a permission as an ability. This one, for example, determines if a user can or cannot create a transmittal. There are 3 settings for each permission. The first is NA or not available. This is the default value and it means that that feature is not available to this user role. However, that feature can be made available via another role. Next is grant. This, as the name implies, means that the role is able to use this feature or function. And last is deny. This prevents access to the function. If a user is assigned more than one role where a feature is denied on one of them, that permission cannot be overridden by the other roles. Permissions provide a simple way to control what users can or cannot do within Aconex. Permissions and roles provide a highly configurable way of controlling what your team can and cannot do in Aconex. First, a quick reminder of the roles that are created by default for all organisations. There are 5 roles in total, and we explain each one in more detail in another video. All new user accounts are automatically assigned to the Basic Plus role. Most organisations don't make any changes to these standard roles. If they do, roles are usually created to match, say, the job function of the person using Aconex. But let's show you how easy it is to change the settings and create new roles. We go to Setup and User Role Configuration. As you can see, the roles have been changed a lot. This is a good example of what can be done and means that each user can be given a very tailored and specific role. We'll scroll down to the Documents section and take a look at some of the permission settings. You can see that this role is not allowed to update documents because it has NA as its setting. If we wanted to allow that role to update documents, we would simply change the setting to grant and click Save. That's it. Here's another example. Notice that this role, the ability to create a transmittal, is set to Deny. That means that any user assigned to this role will not be able to create and send transmittals. Not only that, but if that same user is also assigned to another role in addition to this one, they still won't be able to send a transmittal because it's been denied by this basic role. That's really important to remember. You can see that there are a lot of permissions and options in Aconex, so when making any changes, don't change too many in one go because if a problem occurs, it will be much harder to figure out where you went wrong. You can create a new user role here, but why would you need to do this? Well, a good example is when your team are using additional Aconex modules like tenders or supply documents. These modules have very specific features that you don't want everybody using. You can create a new role just for that module, leave all the permissions set to NA, and then just enable those permissions that relate to that module. Then the users that need to access that module's features can simply be assigned that role in addition to their current role. One last thing about roles is that they can also be applied at the project level. Notice the tab here. This allows you to create roles that only apply to your organisation's users who are working on a specific project. It's a smaller list of permissions than those we were looking at previously. This type of role is only used when you need to allow more or less feature access for a user on a specific project. For example, a user may have basic access at the organisation level, but may need increased access on a particular project. To finish off, we're going to look at how we assign users to these roles. We click User Role Assignment. We can then tick or untick the roles being assigned to each user. It's that simple. Users can be assigned more than one role. That then means the highest level of access to a feature prevails. For example, if one role has a feature set to NA, but another has that same feature set to grant, the user will be granted that feature. The exception is where a feature is set to deny for a role. Even if the user's other role assignment grants the feature, the deny will override it. Remember, the default roles are rarely changed by most organisations, but if you do need to control access to features more precisely, roles are very useful. If you're an org admin, you'll be looking after your organisation's preferences. The preferences have a hierarchy, so let's take a look at that now. Essentially, preferences start at the top level and flow down. Not all preferences flow down because they might only relate to a specific level. It's likely that you'll never need to change too many preferences, but it's good to understand the hierarchy. At the top, we have the Aconex preferences that are controlled by, you've guessed it, Aconex. These are not accessible by anyone else and they control a lot of the default preferences and suit most organisations and most projects. Next we have organisation preferences. The defaults at this level filter down from the Aconex preferences, but you can change and override certain ones. You can also lock certain preferences at this level to prevent changes at the project and user levels below. Then we have project level preferences. Again, the defaults at this level filter down from the levels above, but you can change and override certain ones. And as with the org preferences, you can lock certain ones to prevent changes at the user level below. Finally, we have the user level preferences. Anyone who has an Aconex account can change certain preferences that relate to just themselves, and we cover those in more detail in another video. As we've said before, you probably won't be changing the preferences a lot, but it's good to know how the hierarchy works and how each level can affect the one below. As the org admin, you can set various preferences for your team. Let's take a look. To manage preferences, we select the option via Setup. There are different tabs displayed at the top of the page. The tabs that you'll see will depend on your role. Here we'll just take a look at the user-related preferences. If you're on the User tab, you'll only alter your own personal preferences, so we'll move to the Organisation tab. There are a lot of options on this page, so let's concentrate on the ones that are likely to be the most useful. First, we'll quickly explain the default setting checkbox. This box tells us if the default is being used. The defaults are set by Aconex, and in most circumstances they suit most organisations. In order to change the options that have a default setting, you'll need to remove the tick. Let's get back to the options. Security is a great place to start. In another video, we discussed creating and managing users and controlling password preferences for individual users. Here's where we set it for everyone in our organisation. First is the password strength. The default or standard option is pretty strong, but there's a complex one too that requires more specific criteria to be used. Then there's the setting that controls how long passwords last before they expire and need to be reset. As before, you can decide to enforce a different setting. Once you've made any changes, just remember to click the Save button so they take effect. One thing to note is that the password access or expiry rule always has the same incorrect password attempts set to 5. And this means that after 5 unsuccessful attempts at logging in, the system will automatically lock that user account. Remember that as an org admin, you can unlock the account. We've discussed the importance of communication in other lessons. Well, changing the security settings are a prime example. If you were to just change these settings without telling anyone, there could be a great deal of frustration on the part of the user when their password next expires. It's better to communicate changes like this in advance so that people know what to expect and what they need to do. Remember the 3 C's: consistent, concise, and clear communications. Next up are the notification preferences. We'll need to scroll down to see them. Here they are, and we'll focus on the email option. This determines the setting for notifications. Notification only means that the user will get an email notification for each mail sent to them on a project, but that notification won't contain any of the detail. You can adjust this setting for all users if you need to send a full body notification and even notifications with attachments. The last preference worth noting is the session time. It determines how long before a user will be logged out after any inactivity. This is something that users often increase themselves, so it may be good for you to change it for all users in your organisation. That's it for user-based preferences. They're pretty easy to understand and change. Just remember that some changes may have an adverse effect on your users. Let's finish this course with a recap of what we've covered and what's next. But first of all, congratulations. If you've finished all the lessons and topics in this course, fantastic job. Thanks for taking the time. Here's what we've covered. There were 3 lessons. We looked at how good communication is important and how we manage new starters and people that leave the team or project. Next, we discussed roles and assets and how they affect what people can do in Aconex. And finally, we covered how we can set some default preferences for others in our organisation. So, what's next? Well, you've completed course 3. You have 3 more courses to complete if you want to finish the specialist level learning. Next, we have a course that looks at workflow administration. Good luck and happy learning.